Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV WORLD. In the show today, we're going to be looking at the Prime Minister's address to the nation last night, in which he spoke about a foreign conspiracy against him. He spoke about how there are foreign interests in toppling the government because Pakistan is pursuing a foreign policy which is independent in the ruling of the PTI government. This is something that Prime Minister highlighted again and again in his address, and how essential it was to Pakistan's prosperity in the future as well. He's spoken about how, because of this independent foreign policy, this current threat and conspiracy exists from a foreign country, and this is something that the opposition alliance is also going to be involved into if they actually proceed with the no confidence motion. He also talked about how, of course, when we look at the bigger picture, it is important for Pakistan to be able to become an international player who's independent and sovereign, and that who is not subject to the wishes or desires of any other country. We're going to be exploring how this address has been taken in by the people within Pakistan as well as outside of the country as well, how different countries around the world have been reacting and responding to it, and what sort of challenges does the foreign policy of Pakistan is actually going to face in the coming months and years, irrespective of whoever is in the government. We will also be taking a look at how the Indian side is reviewing the entire political situation of the country since early March, since we know that there has been talk about the no confidence motion, and with regards to, of course, the motion being tabled, and then the Prime Minister also highlighting this conspiracy. Why is there such an aggressive interest on Pakistan's political scenario? Why there are channels extensively covering what is going on in Pakistan? And exactly how does India's interests in what is going on in Pakistan actually affect the way things are running over here? And then, of course, with the fact that how it is actually going to be perceived by the international community as well. So we'll take an overall analysis of the domestic situation of Pakistan with its impact on the foreign policy relations of the country. With me to discuss this and more, we have Raja Faisal and Farrukh Pitafi in the studios, as always, and we are going to be joined online by respective guests for our first segment with regards to the Prime Minister's speech and its effects on foreign policy and the challenges that exist for Pakistan. We've been joined by Nasir Ali Khan, who's a former ambassador. He's joined us online. Thank you very much, Mr. Nasir, for joining us. I'll start with you, Ambassador Saab. When we hear what the Prime Minister spoke about in his address last night, of course, he emphasized the fact that an independent foreign policy is essential for Pakistan, something perhaps that has not as vigorously been followed previously by any other government, and that because of which we are facing the kind of threat we are facing right now. With regards to these instances and the way that this has been described by the Prime Minister, what options are there on the table for Pakistan to be able to pursue its foreign policy, not only with a particular country in reference, but in general with different countries of power?
Well, let me start that no country in the world has an independent foreign policy. Foreign policy is primarily based on relations between two countries. There is no country that can be doing whatever it likes with no impact on other countries. So we always have common interests, and wherever there is a commonality of interests, we have a successful exchange. Now, having said that, any country's foreign policy to be effective, that country has to be relevant in terms of its economy or in terms of its military power or in terms of its alliances. So to say that we are going to pursue a totally independent foreign policy, I think our foreign policy is something that needs to be conducted with dignity and with respect, and that we should be able to tell the world that there are certain red lines that we are not willing to cross. Now, if you look at this letter that we've been discussing in the past few days, if the contents of this letter are correct, then this is something that poses an existential threat to our system. Because I just cannot imagine that the system with this kind of major flaw in it, it seems to me that in this situation, any government, whether it is the United States or it's India, can put enough funds or enough efforts to our system to be able to break away 20 or 40 MNAs and bring down a government. So, you know, this is, although the law says that somebody who votes against their party will be deseated, but as far as this no confidence move is concerned, That would happen after the fact. That would happen after the government has already fallen. So what I'm trying to say is if somebody, any foreign power, had enough funds to throw at the system and wean away people from the ruling party, they could make any government fall.
Right. Right. Ambassador Saab, you're right about independence of foreign policy as well. But is it fair to say that every country or every nation seeks to have a proactive foreign policy where it decides what exactly to do and it is not actually dictated by others?
You have to have a system where you make a decision, you formulate a policy, and you try your best to conduct that foreign policy. But any country's foreign policy depends on its national policy, on the conditions which prevail within the nation. You will be more effective in conducting your foreign policy if your economy is strong, if you're not beholden to anyone else, if you don't have to go around seeking loans all over the place, then you will be able to conduct your policy more effectively. Either that or you something that the rest of the world wants. You
All right,
have
Ambassador
resource.
Saab, what you mean to say is that prior to our economic development or economic strength being at par with a country that should be or can actually exercise an independent or proactive foreign policy, we should fall back from that?
No, I did not say that. I said,
Okay.
there are, as far as our independence is concerned, obviously there are certain things that pose an existential threat to our country or our system. We cannot compromise on that. But as far as conducting foreign policy is basically relations between different countries. And now, increasingly, there are less and less political issues between countries. There are more and more economic issues between countries. Right. So if there is something that I can sell to you that you want, you will be careful of how you treat me. Or if I have a huge market.
Ambassador Saab, earlier you were talking about certain red lines that can be defined. One, you have already, expressed your opinion about, that is threat to the system. Can you also define other deadlines that might be there which have to be taken care of when it comes to Pakistan's foreign policy, sir?
Yes, absolutely. If, for example, there was this conflict in Afghanistan and NATO forces were there and they were blaming us all the time for supporting people, and they were threatening us and saying that we are not doing enough. If we were not a nuclear armed country, there was this possibility that they might invade us. Like, in the case of Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos were bombed because, it did not suit the American policy at that time. So similarly, a red line in this case would have been that Pakistan will not allow any foreign forces to actually have boots on the ground in Pakistan. That sort of thing is a red line. Similarly, if we have forbid an attack from India, obviously, if they start.
But isn't that just a very obvious hard red line? Are there any other red lines that perhaps cannot be crossed, such as the cable we've received?
To the system, anything that threatens the system itself. I mean, the United States, for example, are very keen to promote democracy all over the world. It's liberal hegemony or liberal imperialism. They're very keen to do that. But if what they are supposed to be doing right now is a clear example of something which is not democratic, it's not the will of the people at this point. So if they are interfering to that extent in our political system, that is certainly a red line.
Absolutely. I believe, Faisal, you had a question? Or
no.
You don't anymore. No. All right. When we talk about, of course, the situation with regards to the foreign conspiracy that the Prime Minister keeps on highlighting, I understand that there is also something with reference to the kind of response that Pakistan needs to give in such a situation. What you're referring to perhaps is an option when we talk about our relationship with other countries in any other scenario or in general. But when we've actually received such a cable, what should Pakistan's response be?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the cable you were referring to. What cable are you referring to?
The one the Prime Minister referred to.
The cable from our ambassador in the United States?
The cable that the Prime Minister kept referring to from a foreign country, yes.
Yes, obviously, yes. We are going to, we are not going to allow that to happen. So, but there is a flaw in the system itself. You can remember the case of Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor, who clearly said that we will interfere in Pakistan's system, we will export terrorism to Pakistan, and this is how we intend. There are other people, other commentators who have been openly saying that they will be, buying politicians in Pakistan. The system has to change and we cannot allow this to happen.
Right. Ajit Doval actually called it...
All right. We're just going to go to a short break before we continue the discussion, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the debate. We're discussing the Prime Minister's speech, the address to the nation yesterday, where he spoke about Pakistan's independent foreign policy and how that is a necessary requirement for the progress of the country. And we're talking to Ambassador Nasir Ali Khan. Faisal, you had a question for him?
Ambassador Nasir, I just wanted to ask, could we equate whatever is happening in Pakistan, could we equate it to whatever happened in Turkey? Because we saw that Turkey, obviously, in the 21st century, they changed their approach towards their foreign policy and they were considered as independent, and suddenly a coup was staged there, but of course that was unsuccessful. Over here in Pakistan, could we say that similar kind of political tactics or similar kind of regime change tactics are being used, and we might see a similar result?
Well, look, when you think that Turkey is independent foreign policy, my point in Turkey was they were able effect foreign policy. Okay? If you're living in a and one person says, I'm totally independent, I'll do whatever I like, he's not going to have a very good relationship with the family. So what I'm trying to say is foreign will be more effective when your country is strong. When Turkey's economy picked up and more people relied on Turkey, relationships with Turkey, then the foreign policy of Turkey was more effective. Even the United States or China cannot have a totally independent foreign policy. Yes, to some extent, the Americans are able to do things which could not be imagined by other nations that may be weaker in some way. But even they have to have other considerations when they have relationships. There is this concept of American exceptionalism. The fact that they are such a powerful country and they are such a large market, that they get away with things that countries like ours cannot. So my point is,
that point is great, but I wanted to actually connect with this.
What the Prime Minister is trying to say is that we need conduct our foreign policy with dignity, and we need to have people in power who are not beholden to any foreign agents or foreign powers. That is the message that the Prime Minister was trying to give in his speech.
Absolutely, sir. May I ask you another question about Turkey, because you particularly referred to Turkey's economic strength. If you recall, after 9/11, Pakistan made a decision and it became a part of the war on terror. Similarly, in 2003, when invasion of Iraq was going on, at that time Turkey was also asked for air corridor or permission to use its air to invade Iraq. But at that time, Turkey first renegotiated its economic package or bailout with IMF, and then by taking the matter to the parliament, rejected the notion. Do you think that after that their economic situation improved? And the question is, Pakistan also keeps on compromising on certain policies, but we don't see that kind of economic revival in the country. What is different between Turkey and Pakistan that we never seem to capitalize on such opportunities?
Well, let me talk about the present situation in Pakistan. The two factors that I want to highlight. Number one, when this government came into power, they said that we are not going to go to the IMF. I feel that they had not done their homework enough. They did not realize the situation of the economy. And as a result of that, they had to finally go to the IMF. Now, who are the countries that would influence the IMF and would influence the fact whether we get a good deal from the IMF or we don't get a good deal from the IMF? It's mainly Western powers and mainly the United States that have the largest contribution in the Bretton Woods system. Now, coming back to the other point that I'm trying to make, as far as our exports are concerned, let's look at our trade with China. It must be about $12 billion worth. Out of that, most of it is some things that we import from them. We barely export about $1.5 billion to China. Now, China is a very strong partner. I'm not trying to lessen their importance. But then when you look at our exports, we rely very heavily on the European Union and the United States. So, what I'm trying to say is the way we need to conduct our foreign policy is with dignity and with logical explanations and try to find places where our interests converge with the interests of whoever is our interlocutor. Whichever country that we
when you talk about, of course, an independent foreign policy, I understand what you're saying when you talk about how it needs to be followed with dignity. Do you think that the kind of foreign policy that Pakistan has followed over its history over the years has been at least baseline independent, as you referred to, that we actually do carry ourselves with dignity? And if not, and we're just pursuing that now, is just that reaching that even baseline for independent foreign policy bears us a cost? Should we bear it?
No, that's not what I'm trying to say. In answer to your question, have we had an independent foreign policy? Again, let me refer to something that the Prime Minister mentioned in his speech last night. He said that when I was a young man, Pakistan was just doing great. It had great respect. It had a wonderful economy. Our economic growth was wonderful. And since then, we have just come down, and countries like South Korea and Malaysia and all have, overtaken us. Now, we need to remember that at that time, if you're asking me whether our policy was independent, our policy was aligned to the United States. Because there was a time during the Cold War where India was aligned more with Russia, with the Soviet Union, and we were aligned with the Americans. And when he says that, it was good governance, and it was not Qaid-e-Azam's government, it was Ayub Khan's government. It was the alliances that we had made, whether they were military alliances like SEATO and CENTO, or whether we were getting military assistance, we were getting economic assistance, we were given loans to be able to make the Bela Dam and Mangla Dam and things like this. So, in the case of South Korea, for instance, the United States wanted to show to the communist world that, the difference between the North, who are communist, and the South, who are democratic. So they gave them preferential treatment. They gave them access to their market. They gave them assistance and access to finance. And that is how the South Korean economy grew. This is the same way that from the late 50s to maybe the late 60s, our economy grew. But we were dependent, we were aligned with something, and they were dependent on us too. They had a reason to help us. The reason was that they wanted to form a bulwark against communism. And
would you call it a new Cold War or a start to a new Cold War where regime changes and regime settlements would be happening?
And Ambassador sir, I'm also still waiting for the answer regarding the comparison between Turkey and Pakistan, that why is it that Turkey benefits whenever it actually uses its foreign policy to align or not align, and Pakistan, despite being so much aligned, has problems such that our economy never stands up on its feet.
I agree. It's a matter of, being able to negotiate the right deal when you are required. I can give you an example of Egypt. When they were required, they had all their loans written off. When we were needed during the Afghan invasion, we did not have the wherewithal or the negotiating power to be able to get all our loans written off, for instance. So yes, you are right. The leadership makes a big difference. And to that extent, yes, we can have a more forceful foreign policy if there are people with the wherewithal to actually look the other person in the eye and say, look, if you want me to do this, this is the quid pro quo. So it's a personality thing as well. So you are right.
About the Cold War, Faisal's question.
Yes, about the Cold War.
Is it a new Cold War or a start of a new Cold War where regime changes would be taking place?
Yes, there is a very high possibility. I personally feel that there are going to be great changes both in the global economies as well as in military alliances, as well as new security paradigm, especially in Europe, because Europe is beginning to realize that we are relying far too much on the United States. And because they are such a large part of NATO, there are many instances in which we have to listen to them, although it is detrimental to our own nation. I can give you the example of Germany, for instance. It is a known fact that Germany was not very keen to mention the expansion of NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. They are trying to have a closer relationship with Russia because they are relying very heavily on the energy that Russia is supplying to Germany. Now, they were not keen to do this. They were not keen to go to war. They were not keen to include Ukraine in NATO. Whereas Russia had clearly said that this is a bright red line for us. We are not going to allow you to have NATO forces in the Ukraine. We are not going to allow Ukraine to be a part of NATO. And if that happens, we are going to take action. So now, as far as the European countries are concerned, they are definitely going to be rethinking their whole security paradigm. They're going to be putting more.
Ambassador Saab, we're almost out of time. Our last question to you is, when you talk about the alignment that you have spoken about with reference to Pakistan historically, I understand that, but even if we're not realigning ourselves, we're only moving towards perhaps a more independent and proactive policy. That is still also realignment from something that we have already or over the years have been aligned to, and that perhaps also doesn't sit well with the country that we have been aligned with, which means that there are going to be apparently consequences for it. Should we incur those consequences upon ourselves given the current scenario and still opt for an independent, proactive foreign policy given our economic situation?
No, I think our policy will continue to be driven by our compulsions. At the moment, the state of the economy and the current account deficit, the balance of payments, we need to have countries that will be buying our products. That's the bottom line, okay? That is where we need to concentrate. We need to export more so that our economy is stronger. We are less reliant on loans and things. And that's when we can have a more so-called independent
All
policy.
right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nasser Ali Khan, for joining us and giving us your perspective with regards to an independent foreign policy that Pakistan needs to be pursuing and what the Prime Minister spoke about yesterday. What we're also going to talk about in the debate is India's coverage of the political situation in the country and how aggressively they have covered the entire political situation in the country and what really their agenda is. Faisal, what is really going on in terms of the Indian media? What are they talking about with reference to Pakistan?
Sana, I was amazed yesterday because all of the screens, around 22 of Indian media screens, they were showing Prime Minister of Pakistan live everywhere. It seems like, India is obsessed with Pakistan and India is obsessed with the fact that they want to see Prime Minister Imran Khan removed from the Premier office. And I have a liberty of talking to many Indians who have served, and few of them they are still serving their country. And I keep on, getting a notion from them, and that is that they do not like Prime Minister Imran Khan.
Okay.
They might have, liked him while he was a cricketer, but when it comes to politics, of course, they do not like Pakistan. The only reason behind it is that, we know in February 2019, he said, we will not think about retaliation, we will retaliate. And since then, he wasn't darling anymore.
All right, so he was before and now he's not anymore. With reference to the no confidence motion, of course, there has been a lot of talk with what is going on internationally as well. And we've also seen that India, of course, as Faisal Farrukh was talking about earlier, has spoken a lot about Pakistan's domestic matters, even though whenever we talk about issues which are of international concern, such as Kashmir, they keep on referring to how this is an internal matter of India and none of the concern for Pakistan. Do you think that this is normal for a country such as India to talk about an internal matter of Pakistan as much as they did?
You're asking
Yes.
me, right? I marvel at the flatness of Indian mind. India is a 1 billion plus country, 1.3 billion people. I think they should have better things to discuss, but they don't, right? And why is it happening? It is happening because India internally is going through humongous transition, which is not a good transition. It is a transition backwards, a regression or retrogression. At that time, most of the journalists who were trained to be secular, what do? They shut their eyes or they externalize their problems. Instead of obsessing about their local politics, where they know that somebody can show up at their door and shoot them down at their doorstep, they actually discuss something that will rally the entire country around, and that is Pakistan. So earlier Faisal was saying that he is under the impression that Indian media doesn't like Prime Minister of Pakistan. So let me give you a little bit of further insight, Faisal. I don't think Indian media likes any of Pakistanis at all. It hates our guts, right? Because they cannot do much. If you are doing anything better in your country, they will keep on obsessing and trivializing it, and they will keep on complaining about it. Pakistan is a country that, despite its weaknesses and for the first 50 years, realized that it had an existential threat from extremism, religious extremism. It fought a war and managed to actually survive against that war, the war on terror. Compare it with another country called India that had similar kind of threat from RSS from 1947. It did nothing, right? That RSS and its other inspired splinters kept on killing people. First of all, they killed Gandhi. They killed so many other people. And in the end, that extremist terrorist group has taken over the state.
Right.
So what are they going to do? They are going to talk about you endlessly because they cannot talk about their own selves.
Farrukh, I just want to mention another thing. One of my friend, I won't name him, he's from, obviously he's a journalist from India. He once said to me, to me, I think your country has a leadership scarce. You can't bring the leadership, and that's why you are bringing in cricketers. Then I said to him, look, it's better to have cricketers as leaders of the country rather than having the butchers.
Right. Let us also welcome in the debate Mr. Javed Siddiqui, who's a senior analyst. He's joined us online. Let's take his opinion on the matter as well. Welcome to the debate, Mr. Javed. When we talk about the situation in India and that extensive coverage of what is going on in Pakistan, we're discussing whether or not this is appropriate for a country to do so. And in terms of the way that Pakistan actually should be responding to this, do you think that we should offer them our sympathy for being so obsessed with us, or should we actually retaliate in terms of our own responses to whatever they're saying on media?
Well, we should have no doubt about the Indian strategy regarding Pakistan. Pakistan is the enemy number one of India from their perspective. So they are trying to destabilize Pakistan and through various strategies, various methods. For instance, they have attacked Pakistan physically in 1971 to dismember it. And subsequently, they have been interfering in Pakistan's internal affairs in a number of ways. And now, in this day and age, when media is playing a very important role in stabilizing a country or otherwise. I think they are using this war of media against Pakistan, and the media for the last so many years, particularly when Mr. Modi has come into power, has been interfering massively in Pakistan's internal affairs and spreading lies about Pakistan. Propaganda is one of the key tools that India is using against Pakistan to defame it internationally. So I think
Javed Siddiq Sahab, that actually makes a lot of sense that India is deploying its media as a weapon of war and propaganda. I totally get it, and it is a legitimate use whether we like it or not. But there is something very unique that is happening. For example, Barkha Dutt, one of our friend, journalist friend, call her Bakha Dutt. I don't know what that means. But Barkha Dutt actually, who takes credit that her mother was actually standing on a tank when it was India was invading East Pakistan. She actually is doing a show psychoanalyzing Prime Minister and his marriage. Do you think that this kind of low bar in journalism has ever been seen anywhere?
I think they have crossed all limits in recent months and days to defame Pakistan, and particularly the target of the Indian media is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, because Prime Minister of Pakistan has been standing tall as far as India is concerned, and he is talking about India, trying to unveil and expose Indian designs against Pakistan. So he's a very strong voice for Pakistan. That's why they are attacking him and his family and using all kind of slander to defame him. But I think, the Indian media's attempts to do this are exposed fully. And those
Right, but
people
Javed,
who
so we
are...
understand that outright false news, fake propaganda, so many things which have been completely inaccurate have gone away with hardly any consequence. There has been so much that has been exposed with regards to Indian media and what they talk about and how it's actually linked back to the higher authorities in India as well. However, at the end of the day, this is not something that is facing any sort of consequence, and the population within India also continues to digest this information and actually form their own opinions accordingly. So how are we to respond to this when we know that the kind of content that is being fed to the population is what is creating the kind of mindset that now exists in India?
I think our media should also respond to what they are saying and the falsehood that they are spreading against Pakistan. We need to expose the falsehood that they are propagating against Pakistan, but we cannot stoop that low as the Indian media is doing. As Faisal has pointed out, that a very towering Indian journalist, Barkha Dutt, and others, they are resorting to these kind of, unconfirmed and false propaganda and using that against Pakistan. A journalist's credibility is so important for him or her that before filing a story or before speaking, he or she should confirm the story itself and the contents.
But journalism credibility has no place in India. Perhaps they're being judged on a completely different criteria. What they're doing right now makes them good journalists in India.
I think the Western media is taking note of it. I have seen some reports where the Indian propaganda journalism has been fully exposed, and they are very critical of it because many stories that have been filed by the Indians and the stories that are done on TV screens have no substance. So the other world, the world outside India, is taking note of it.
All right.
Pakistan.
I'll come to you, Faisal. Let me just welcome in the debate Mr. Javed Rana, who's a senior journalist. He's also joined us. Thank you very much, and welcome to the show. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, I'll ask obviously Javed Rana because he keeps an eye on foreign affairs as well. Javed, very recently I was talking to another friend from India, and I asked him if Imran goes and the other party comes, what would be in it for you? Then he said to me, well, we are expecting that PMLN would come, or obviously Nawaz Sharif or his brother would come, and they have very good relations with Biden, obviously American president. So if they are having good relations with Biden, and we are having good relations with America as well, so we would be in a better position to obviously tackle all of the problems faced in our region. Would you agree with this? And that is why the Indian media is highlighting so much about no confidence motion? Javed Rana.
Javed Rana, you'll have to unmute your mic.
I think
For some reason, we can't hear you. Not physically, sir. But okay.
All right. I think we'll try again.
Will you allow me to ask a question, put a question to Javed Sadiq, sir?
Sure.
if we can ask the same question from Javed Sadiq, if that's possible.
You'll have to repeat the entire question then.
Javed Sadiq sir, did you hear the question, sir?
I did, but I think you need to repeat it briefly. Yes.
Yeah, briefly, I talked with another friend from India, and I said, what's in it for you if obviously Prime Minister Imran Khan goes and the other party comes? Then he goes, we are expecting that PMLN or obviously Nawaz Sharif or his brother would come into power. And as we know that he is having very good relations with Joe Biden, the president of US, and India, of course, having good relations with Americans. They believe that it would be very good for the region because they will be in a position to talk to Pakistan then, and they can't talk to Pakistan right now.
Well, I think that is a very blatant interference in Pakistan's internal affairs. And as far as Nawaz Sharif is concerned, some of his critics already have been accusing that he has a soft corner for India. And the Pakistani media has been reporting the links between the Sharifs and the Modi family. And the way Indian Prime Minister flew from Kabul to attend one of the wedding ceremony in Lahore of Sharif family, that's also a known fact. So therefore, I think this kind of criticism and this kind of assertion made by your journalist friend, Indian journalist friend, is unfair, absolutely. And that is an interference in Pakistan's internal affairs. We don't want Modi to be replaced by some political party there. That is the matter to be solved by the Indian people, Indian electorate. So I think
you say you're speaking for yourself, because I certainly would want him to be changed. But let me, with your permission, Sana, very quickly ask Javed Rana a question.
Actually, Javed Rana's mic is not working, so we won't
Still
be able
not
to
working
connect with
because
him.
I can see him.
If you have a question for Javed Sadiq, then we'll have to.
Javed Sadiq Saab, again, since we are talking about media and the quality of media, usually when media doesn't address your local issues, it stops getting the kind of ratings that are needed. Right? This has been happening in Pakistan, it has been happening in all over the world. Why is it that Indian media, despite obsessing about Pakistan rather than their own problems, it still keeps on getting the kind of ratings that we see?
I think the Modi government has created an environment in which Pakistan holds a central position. And they are trying to, the Indian government and Modi government is trying to externalize its internal problems and is blaming Pakistan and also blaming the Muslims living in India. So right now, we are the target. The people of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, the army of Pakistan, the armed forces, and the Muslims living in India. So this whole bashing campaign that has been launched through the Indian media is against Pakistan, against Pakistan Army.
Can these ratings be fake, sir? Can these ratings be fake?
Yeah, I think Pakistan needs to take note of it, but I think our media has been very scrupulous in this regard. We are not there to promote fake news, and we don't believe in propaganda and these kind of things. However, whatever is happening in India, that's being taken note of by the international organization, UN, Rights Council of Human Rights, has taken note of the...
But unfortunately, still we see no real consequence for India. But thank you so much, Javed Siddique, for joining us and being a part of the show today. Whatever goes on, of course, with regards to Indian media is important with reference to the kind of opinion it is being forming for the people, not only for India but around the world. But it's essential for the entire world to be able to understand what is really going on and for us to expose that reality, even though we still haven't really seen a consequence. With regards to the domestic matters of Pakistan, of course, there's much that still remains to be seen, but what is for sure that Pakistan needs to be able to follow a foreign policy which is aligned with its own national interests. Thank you so much for joining the debate. We'll see you on the Monday.